Hi, I'm Joe Polizzi, and this is the Content Inc. podcast. 5 minutes every Monday for content creators who desire to be content entrepreneurs. Happy Thursday, everyone. In continuing our Content Inc. book series, this week we have my good friend, Brian Clark. Now, if you don't know Brian, he's one of the OGs of content marketing and content entrepreneurship. When I first got my start, this is in about 06, 07, in launching the new business, I spent time on the Copyblogger site almost every day trying to figure out how he was building and monetizing his audience. Now, you are going to love this interview. Enjoy. Okay, so the interview cuts in. Brian was talking a little bit about his past in real estate and law, and then he kicks it off with his movement here into blogging. Here you go.
But I didn't enjoy what I was doing, had a near-death experience, and I kind of left all that behind and decided I was going to join in the blogging movement by teaching people what I had learned about using content and email and blogs to create businesses, and that is how Copyblogger was born.
I'm impressed that you did that in 2 minutes and 50 seconds. This is fantastic.
So, 10 seconds to spare. How about that?
So tell me, I mean, it was a little bit easier back in the day when you started to go after a blog, but there were options for social media. Obviously, you could have built on YouTube, but I know you have how much more you like to write. Tell me how important the focus on the blog was versus going in all different directions.
It's interesting because YouTube came out in 2005, and it was before I launched a product. I did experiment with some affiliate sales that were actually pretty lucrative, but they were really, product market fit testing, basically to see what the audience was interested in and what they would buy. But yeah, our first official product wasn't for 18 months. And the thing I think really helped Copyblogger grow so quickly was that I basically was a heretic to the existing blogging power structure. I broke every rule. The rules back then, such as they were it's just you as the blogger. You write every day. You don't write more than 250 words. It's very big on opinion. And I was like, no, I'm going to write 2,000 word articles a week. They're going to be educational, not opinion. And I'm also going to kind of take aim at a lot of the conventions at the time, which was, as as the godfather of content marketing, people didn't think that way. If they created content, they were selling advertising. That was it. That's all you had as a revenue model. And I said, no, I tried that with my first business and it failed. You know why? It's harder than it seems. But if you have something to sell, then effectively you're using the internet as what it is, a direct medium, a direct marketing medium. And that rubbed some people the wrong way. Everyone I rubbed the wrong way had large audiences, and they kind of all ranted about me, and they misunderstood what their own audiences were interested in, because they were like, oh, sounds interesting to me. And next thing you know, Copyblogger's just growing by leaps and bounds, and I'm getting those indications of what do these people need next? What do they want to buy that will help them succeed with this new way of thinking that Copyblogger brought?
You know what's so fascinating about that? We were talking with the team from Teach Better yesterday on the book tour, and I asked them the same question. How long did it take you to build an audience until you thought you could generate some kind of revenue? It was 18 months for them as well. And that seems to be the 12 to 24 month period where, I look at it as a blessing. You have to have the patience to deal with that. You're like, okay, I need to put food on the table during this time. But if you can wait, the power that you have from a revenue generation standpoint to when you get to that, you coined the term minimum viable audience.
I mean, it was amazing because, I had no intention of, rushing product. And I was very kind of methodical and careful that I was reading the signals right, but the audience was at a point where they're like, take my credit card. They're like, what is going on here? Why won't you sell me something? I mean, can you believe that? Instead of the other way around, which I think we've gotten to these days, where there's such a rush to monetize that you don't have the audience. I mean, if you can have your audience begging you to sell them something, you are doing something right, and patience is a virtue in that regard. If you can get to that point, and I don't think it takes 18 months anymore. I think back then, the blogging world was very much more idealistic and maybe not trusting of someone who was coming in and saying, you should sell stuff, not advertising. But then I did win their trust over. And by that point, they're like, okay, hurry up. Give me something.
Well, that's the big mistake that I made. And I've talked to you many times about it. But when we launched Content Marketing Institute, I was fiddling around trying to sell all kinds of things. And at the same time, they're asking me, Joe, do you offer any training? Joe, is there any in-person events regarding content marketing? And I just said, oh my gosh, they're just telling me what they want to buy.
Oh,
and
yeah.
you fall in love with the product. That's why in a lot of cases, the product-led business model is inferior to the content or audience-led model, because once you have the audience and they know, like, and trust you, as you say, they'll buy whatever you offer. And that's what you did.
Right. And you also know them. Like, I think you saw when Hashim, who's been a longtime Copyblogger fan, responded to our podcast together that we did recently. He said these two guys predicted, content marketing and what people would buy online. And he's talking specifically about me predicting that online education would be huge, which seems so obvious to me. And it became so obvious. But at that time, you had this whole information wants to be free. People aren't going to buy anything. People won't pay for it. And I was like, no, don't be ridiculous. But I knew that I had to overcome that objection, right? In order to convince bloggers that, what you need to do, you need to create courses. If you can write compelling free content, you can create, instructional design focused content and actually sell training. And it's just amazing how much has changed in the last 15 years. You tell people that now and they're like, oh, come on.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. All right, just to reset the room real quick, my name is Joe Polizzi. I'm talking with Brian Clark, part of the Content Inc. book tour. And Brian's kind of laying down how he built Copyblogger. And we're going to talk about some of his other businesses and how he developed an audience and then generated multiple points of revenue. In about 15 minutes, we're going to open it up for questions. So if you have questions, this is our first Twitter Spaces, by the way. So we're both trying to figure this out. So if I can't bring you up on stage, sorry. If you get it. But I'm also looking at TweetDeck right now. So if you want to use the Content Inc. hashtag and ask your question as well, we'll figure that one out. So let's talk about, when did you know, Brian? So you've been built Copyblogger. You were doing the longer form content articles. You're getting found in search. When did you know you had something? What were your aha moments to the model?
Well, the first 3 months were like it often is. I tried a bunch of different things. Like, I had my normal schedule again of writing these longer at the time educational articles, and I would write in sequence. Like my first 10 articles were about copywriting. That became a series called Copywriting 101, which I collected on what I called a content landing page called Copywriting 101. And that was the place where everyone could reference all 10 lessons. Well, guess what? Everyone linked to that page. And next thing you know, I ranked number 1 for copywriting. Then I did the same thing with email marketing, landing pages. So it was very methodical. I've never written a book, as you well know, but I wrote book after book after book worth of material, and then not only gave it away for free, but organized it in a structure that at the time was novel. And I think it's much more accepted now. But in addition to that, I needed what I called a content event, something big, like it could be turned a stunt, or it could be a high value piece of content. And so that's what ended up working. After about 3 months of trying a few things that didn't work, I wrote a free report about getting traffic with content. It went viral, and that really was the audience catalyst. And again, that report was the thing that rubbed some of the old guard bloggers wrong, and they linked to it. And again, the audience said, no, I like this guy. So that was when I knew it was going to work. And then from there, I did some affiliate promotions. I sold a few courses that existed at that time that other people produced just to see if people would buy it. One of those promos made me 50 grand in affiliate commissions. I'm like, yeah, I think they will. And that's when that really kind of led to the first product, which was a course about the intersection of direct marketing and instructional design called Teaching Sales. So basically how bloggers could create training content.
I bought that course.
You did?
Yes.
Wow,
I stopped getting
that.
emails though. I'm like, where to go? No, I'm just kidding. No, I want to ask you a quick side note, because I know you're launching a couple new things right now. Do you think that the model that you just talked about can still work today? With you're building this checklist of courses and this Bible of content on a certain page. Can you still do that today?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's more of a search engine thing. Like, there's been a couple of terms that I've coined that made it into usage, like you mentioned, minimum viable audience, but also cornerstone content. That was me. It used to be called flagship or pillar content. I like alliteration, so I went with cornerstone content, and that's kind of been the accepted term. But that's what those topics, copywriting, email marketing, SEO, those were all cornerstone topics for Copyblogger, because that's what my audience needed to learn. So I'm serving the audience I have while attracting a new audience while making Google happy. So it was really an integrated process. I, for a while, haven't focused as much on search anymore. When I started doing curated newsletters with like Further and Unemployable, because I wanted to I didn't know who my audience really was. I was kind of finding that. And then once I did, for example, with Unemployable, now we're attacking search just like the old days. It's important to understand when you get started that who you attract may not be your ideal prospect and vice versa. So I take a much more intentional approach to my audience building strategy now, just because I know more. And by teaching people, I've really gone deeper on these things. But effectively, I'd say it's the same process.
That's interesting. I mean, when we first started Content Marketing Institute, we were basically targeting all marketers, and then learned that our sweet spot was to enterprise marketers, especially when you had companies like HubSpot that were really going after the small businesses. So we really focused on complex content. But you're right, we didn't know that at first. We learned that as we went. I want to talk about some of the revenue options and decisions that you made, but first I want to get to email. How important was and is email to your overall content strategy?
So it's always, again, started with email in 98, heavily invested in email right now. There was a period of time at the beginning of Copyblogger when blogging was really, business blogging, I should say, was really becoming a movement. RSS adoption among the people paying attention to us was really high. And so that started getting me to think, and I think you might have thought this way at the same time, period, because RSS really is better for the end user, right? Email, if someone has your email address, you can't stop them from emailing you unless you obviously block or mark spam or something like that. With RSS, it was really more user-friendly, but it was really a nerdy tech. Now, a lot of people right now who subscribe to podcasts may not even know that that's the same technology, really simple syndication. So it's under the hood with podcasting, and it's fine. But when you tell people, oh, do you have an RSS reader? They're like, what? What are you talking about? But if you say, what's your email address? Email is ubiquitous. It's the number one sales channel online. You have to earn your spot in that inbox more than ever. And if you got to earn that trust to get people to do business with you. But email was the original killer app, and it's not going anywhere. My kids don't use it that much, but that's because they don't have jobs. Wait till they have jobs. And
That's so
they'll
true.
be right. So everyone wants to predict that email is going to die, and maybe someday we'll have something else, but I don't see it anytime soon.
I remember when I was presenting, I think you were there too, when we were at Social Media Marketing World. I think this was in 2013. And I think 10 minutes of my entire presentation was on be careful of social media, focus on email. And everybody was like, boo, like, you're in a social media. And I said, hey, don't be careful building your house on rented land.
See, that's the thing. Careful. That email list is yours. You download it, you back it up. You use software, of course, to make it work, but you can always switch software. But yeah, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, what have you, it's not really your audience. And Facebook was the ones who made that abundantly clear when they did the biggest bait and switch in history, where they got everyone to build audiences there. And then they said, you got to pay to reach them now.
Well, that's where I'm concerned, and a little bit off topic, but the whole creator economy thing, where they're saying, "Oh, you got to build on these platforms, even Patreon." It's like, "Oh, they're here to help you. They'll help you generate revenue. You can build your business." And I'm just seeing this seductive force come in, and I'm like, "Don't you still have to think like a media professional. You still have to diversify revenue, and you can't solely rely on one other company like." And like a celebrity, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, Brian, a celebrity influencer can get away with it if they're making millions of dollars. Great. They can make that off of YouTube or Twitch or whatever. But if you're the middle class of content creators out there, you need a diversified revenue stream. So let's go into yours, because you went from you had zero revenue around the 18-month mark. You're trying to make it. You start building revenue. How long did it take you to build $1 million business from that time? What were you doing?
So when we launched Teaching Sales, we went from 0 to 6 figures in a week and 7 figures by the end of that year. And then in 2008, if anyone, the old timers will remember that nothing in WordPress was paid. Now we've got an entire WordPress premium economy. But themes were free, plugins were free. That's how it worked with open source. My future business partner, Brian Gardner, was the first guy to sell a premium and supported theme, which was called Revolution. He quickly was making really good money, and he unfortunately told my former business partner how much money he was making, who told me, and I was like, okay. So then we released the first premium design framework for WordPress in 2008. And that quickly went from 10 grand a month to $10,000 a day. And this was amazing to me because all of a sudden I'm in the software business. And that was something I had told myself, being an early fan of the guys at 37 Signals, which is now Basecamp, which is now, I think, devoid of employees. But early on, those guys, I was like, that's amazing, but I could never do that. And then, by 2009, I've got 2 7-figure startups launched off of Copyblogger, and we do our first SaaS, which is, I'm just like, but see, of course, I'm not the coder. I'm the guy who understands the market need, the audience, and the ability to sell things to them, mainly because they trust me. So our first SaaS was focused on SEO copywriting, and then eventually it evolved into a patented content marketing software as a service. So that was the third in a row, and that was the point as we entered 2010 where I exited one partnership, added Brian Gardner's fledgling studio press, and we created Copyblogger Media, which is the company that became the 8-figure company that was later sold off in 2 parts.
That's a fantastic story. I know we're going to go a little bit more in depth on it, but I'm going to bring And again, and if you want to take yourself off of mute, or if I need to do that for you. But I know you have a question. Ann is the managing editor over at The Tilt, and we're going to take some questions if we can. So if you want to ask some questions, now would be the time to ask questions of Brian Clark. But Ann, go ahead with the first question.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, you just tap the microphone for those of you who are unfamiliar with Twitter Spaces, and Joe can call you to the whatever Twitter calls stages. So my question for you, Brian, you talk about the minimal viable audience. I'm curious of how do you know what your minimum is? How do you set that, and maybe how you set it or how you advise others? Is that something you know in the beginning of what that is, or is it something you kind of evolves and then you're like, oh, we're at the minimum viable audience?
Yeah, everyone wants a number. And, I'm like, well, it's not really an overall number. It's a level of engagement that is giving you meaningful information. And that answer always drives everyone crazy, but it's true. You know it when you see it. So you're at minimum viable when you're getting feedback from the audience that, okay, I like this kind of content. This kind, not so much. So during the early days of Copyblogger, that's what I really focused on, looking for cues and patterns about what worked. And this was at the very beginning of fledgling social media. So you got a lot of great feedback. Back then we also had blog comments. So you could tell what was resonating, what was not, what went viral, what didn't, what made the Dig homepage, easy stuff like that. Then there is what I would say a sharing behavior by your audience. When you have enough engagement to where people are actively sharing and promoting content for you. And then finally, and this is the big one for making it from audience to business, is they're giving you indications of pain points that you can turn into solutions of digital products of various types. So, the indications for what kind of product could a blogger create? A blogger can create online education, right? Those were the indications. And also, as I mentioned earlier, indications that I had to overcome resistance at that time that people would pay for online education. Once we entered the WordPress space, it was me as a content creator, frustrated as a non-technical person with what I couldn't do. When I saw that the audience echoed these frustrations, that's how we made Thesis. Same thing with the next software product. So those are my three criteria, and they kind of go in that order. Feedback on what people like, don't like, didn't, resonated, didn't resonate, sharing behavior, and then product development insight, where you're not just dreaming up something that you think they ought to buy, you're getting indications of what they actually want to buy.
I love those three. I also do like to add a number to that. And I know the number probably doesn't mean as much with it, but we use the number at CMI of 10,000 just to keep us focused on audience building. I didn't want to get any products in the way. So we were like, all we're doing right now is building audience. Stop saying when we're going to generate revenue. We'll worry about that when we get to 10,000. And it's great because the whole team is like, oh yeah, all we're doing is we're trying to solve audience needs. And it seemed to work.
And that's a great philosophy. I think Seth Godin, who adopted minimum viable audience from me, gave the number 10,000 too. And I think it's a good number because think about it. You remember the whole Kevin Kelly 1,000 true fans, right? Yep. I would say to get 1,000 true fans, you need 10,000 gross. I mean, it's a good rule of thumb. But I still hesitate sometimes to throw a number out there, because the opposite of that approach is once I get to 10,000, everything's magically great. Not if that engagement's not there. Not if, a sufficient, like what open rate do you have to have out of 10,000 to have truly 1,000 engaged? I just launched a new product off of Further, and I've got 10,000 subscribers, 40% open rate, 1,000 true fans. It's kind of crazy.
That's pretty good. Well, how long has Further been out? Why don't you tell everybody about Further, just so, because
Further's
been dipping. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Further's been out for a long time because it started as just a personal project. During the height of Copyblogger Media, when we got over 10 million in revenue, I was kind of burnout. I wanted to talk about anything other than content marketing. And personally, I needed to do some work on myself as far as health and personal growth and all that kind of good stuff that I was completely unqualified to tell anyone else about, in my own estimation. So that's why I started a curated newsletter, and I just said, I'm going to share with what I'm learning, what I'm finding interesting, and that's just something weird about me, that I needed to go on a personal journey, and I'm like inherently an audience first entrepreneur. I'm like, well, I'm going to bring along people with me because who knows, one day this might be a business. And soon enough, after we sold Studio Press and Rainmaker, that's when I nailed kind of Further's positioning, its tilt in your parlance, and proceeded to try to make it a business. Interestingly, I've also got Unemployable, which started as a podcast during the Copyblogger days. I made that into a business first because it was a more logical next step from Copyblogger, because it was related, and Further was seemingly less related. So that's the only difference I say now. My methodology is similar, if not more sophisticated than it used to be, because I just have more experience. And I'm still driven for these things to succeed. But, Joe, once you've had an exit or two, you don't have that quite the same level of hunger. So I am even more patient these days than I was at the beginning of Copyblogger. But that just means I'm having fun.
Well, I think it's a different kind of hunger, right? I mean, Jason Therian's here listening to this, and we were talking the other day, and I think I have a little bit more patience with it because I know the model takes time to build.
Right.
And when you go in and you say, I'm going to do this audience first thing, and I expect results in 6 to 9 months, and I'm like, okay, well, go do something else, because that's not going to work for you. It takes longer than 6 to 9 months.
I think 6 or 9 months is a minimum of you to really have a handle on what the hell you're doing, and then double that to get, and again, that's how we got to that 18 months, which seems kind of one of those rules of thumb, like the 10,000 people audience.
It's funny because when we looked at all the case studies in the Content Inc. book, I think the shortest time period from start to actually generating significant revenue was John Lee Dumas at Entrepreneurs on Fire. It took him 9 months. Everyone else we looked at was over 12 months.
Yeah, and John will be the first to tell you that he took Pat Flynn's model and did his version of it. So he had a map. Yeah. And that's probably the only reason why he was able to do it. I mean, John is also very talented. But I think having that kind of clear map, I never have a clear map with me because I'm just a contrarian by nature. So I got to go against the grain to a certain degree, but that's what makes it fun, So you got to figure it out that way.
Got to do something there. Okay, so I know we got one question going. If we have some more questions, just bring them up right now. Go ahead and hit the request button. I'll get to you in a second. I want to ask one more question first. You and I talked the other day. There's a lot of really bad advice going on for content entrepreneurs. What are some things that you're seeing out there that you just don't like, that you don't approve of, if you're trying to build an empire like you built at Copyblogger and now Further and Unemployable?
Well, this is a little bit of a spoiler, but just before I got on this Spaces thing, what do we call this?
I think it's Spaces. I think we're instead of a room, we're in a space.
Okay. So the whole, I have a very, very bright and powerful book agent. So that's a hint about what may be coming. But he's all caught up in this creator economy stuff and Substack and Patreon. And I'm just trying to explain to him, first of all, we can have a more cynical view of Silicon Valley platforms because we understand about rented land and the danger and the incongruence between their desires and ours. But I spun it around and I said, look, there was an article I shared with them, and I said, look, these platforms need us more than we need them. And that was the point of the article, which is Silicon Valley tech firms clamoring for talent. The talent was us, right? And they've kind of made this terminology for creator economy to label something that's existed for 15 or 20 years. And we're proof of that. But they make it all shiny and new and repositioned and what have you. And so you have to you have to be patient with people who think this is new, and at the same time don't understand what we mean when we say to be wary of building on someone else's land, especially when with solutions like ConvertKit for email and Stripe for payment processing and WordPress. Even though most of it is now paid, it's still open source. You can build anything with it. I'd hate for that to come across as an old school attitude. It's actually a much smarter way to approach this, but we fight this battle all the time. And Substack is doing a great job of convincing people that if you use Substack, it'll be easier to get an audience. But Substack doesn't have anything to do with you getting an audience.
No, they don't.
What they've done is pay people who already had audiences to use Substack, right? And they're working their magic. There are very smart people, obviously, in California who depend on riding waves. So I've kind of spun this in this direction, which is for 15 years now, we have established that solo and very small teams can make outsized amounts of money with audience first business models. And now the VCs recognize this and they want in on it, right? Who can fault them?
Yeah.
But I think it's up to us to keep saying, keep telling the truth, keep saying, preach that you don't necessarily, you want to own your own assets to the extent that you can.
I'm concerned as well. I've been ranting about the whole creator economy thing for a long time because it's like, oh, Twitter's doing this and YouTube's doing this and Twitch is doing this. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. But I think we have to think, you have to diversify. And just like you would diversify a financial portfolio, you're not going to say, I'm going to buy all AT&T stock and that's all I'm going to do. That's what they're talking about. That you could put everything into being a Twitch streamer and get your tipping off of Twitch. And I'm like, no, you can build your platform on Twitch, but you better be thinking, a multitude of different revenue opportunities. Okay, let's see if we can do this and take a question here. I'm going to figure this thing out. I'm going to approve Creative Writer. Creative Writer, you are connecting right now. Do you have a question for Mr. Brian Clark? And no. We do. See, what? See, this is why. Okay, we're back. You got it. Are you there, sir? Ma'am?
Creative Writer is still on mute right now.
Okay. Creative Writer, take yourself off mute. Can I do that?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, that's okay. Just hang on there. We're going to figure this out. You figure out how you're going to get off of mute, whatever. If you were starting this today, Brian, and I know you almost did because you keep starting things, where would you build your platform? Would you do it the same way? Would you build it off a blog and email? Would you find a home somewhere else? Where's the easiest place to go? Does it depend on audience for everybody listening to this who wants to start this thing up, or they're maybe on multitude of different platforms? What would be your recommendation?
You always start first with audience research. And again, the tools are better. Rand Fishkin, who started Moz and ended up leaving, has a new startup called SparkToro, which basically takes the fire hose of all the platforms and places that your audience can hang out and make that a little bit easier to search but it's really the same process that I've been doing since 2000. You search, you get hit by tons of information, you get overwhelmed, you take a step back, you try to make sense of it, and you try to figure out, okay, here's where my audience is, and here is the best way to attract them with the content that I'm creating, or even the curation of other people's content that I'm doing. So I don't think it's any different. It's just, there's just more places. Social media went mainstream 10 years ago now. The whole world changed when that happened, because before 2010 or 11, only nerds like me were online all the time, right? And I'll include you in that too, Joe.
Thank you, sir.
But now it's a problem almost that everyone's online all the time, and your parents are on Facebook getting bad information about all sorts of things. So that was an inflection point that really dates back 3 years earlier to the launch of the iPhone and the popularization of smartphones. That's what got social media to go mainstream. So now people hang out online all the time. The problem is finding, the right kind of people and where they're going. So right now, everything is very centralized on these big social platforms, but we're heading into, I hope, even though it may present challenges, into a more decentralized internet where we all kind of have our own little outpost, and we control our own data and we control our own land. I mean, that's been the dream. That's how the internet started. And we've gone, I think we may see that the time of these big platforms was an aberration, that it just went that way because people came online and they needed some place to meet their friends, and Facebook was there and everyone was there, and that made it easy. The next version of the web will probably be more decentralized, just like finance is becoming. And it'll move from a page metaphor to a place metaphor with augmented and virtual reality. That's the kind of stuff that I get geeked out about, because that'll be a bigger shift than we've seen from Web 1.0 to Web 2.0, right? Which was just static to social web. Now we're going into a phase where, again, our kids will probably go, do you remember what the internet was like? LOL.
It's the same thing. I'm just shaking my head here, but it's you and I have talked about Creator Coin, and that's why I'm just infatuated with it, because I think the possibilities of having a self-sustained economy, as your network and your subscribers, is fascinating to me, and I want to see if it's possible. That's kind of what I don't know if it is. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. So that's why I'm into it, because there's so much opportunity today. Sean, I'm going to try to. Sean, can you take yourself off? Okay, good. Sean, you got a question for Brian? Perfect.
Yeah, thanks. Brian, just want to say I think this is making me remember how much I liked reading Copyblogger and Google Reader every day when that was around. But so like my question, I think, kind of speaks to this in between period that you were just speaking about, where let's say you're launching something new, you don't have the type of audience and trust that I think both you and Joe have developed over the years. You're bought into the idea that you want to, you don't want to build on somebody else's rented land, right? Which makes total sense. You're bought into the idea that you should build a list of subscribers, right, that you could take with you. But what about the community aspect, where a part of that research phase that you were speaking about really comes from fostering communication back and forth between the audience that you're attempting to build? Not just getting them to listen to you, but you listening from them. It's so easy to kind of build that community on, say, a Facebook group or a Slack channel. Would you go down that path without the resources of really building something of your own that's going to work?
Yeah, no.
Or would you cut that part out?
Yeah, I don't have a problem. Like during the early phases, as long as your head is in the right place, that the Slack channel or the Facebook group is not the permanent vehicle. It is a learning place. Now, the only difference now, so during the emergence of blogs, comments were a real deal. You'd post something, get hundreds of comments, and it was just a research, an insight-rich environment. I mean, they're right there responding to something you wrote. You're getting immediate feedback at the content level. You're getting sharing feedback right away. You're getting product ideas from the places where people are getting stuck, or the pain that they're expressing, the desire they're expressing. So that was a time when you could build a WordPress site and have your nascent free community right there. And then social media killed that. Social media killed blog comments, along with the fact that a lot of blog comments are awful. Once things always change. So I know there are people doing amazing things with Facebook groups, because they know that's the blog comment section for them. That's where they see how people talk about a subject. That's how they see what the pain and desires are, and also where they add value and build trust. But at that point, you've got to send them somewhere else, especially for the product phase. But see, what Joe was alluding to earlier is like what Twitter's doing. Twitter wants you to do that and keep you within that ecosystem. And I have no interest in using Twitter's tools, because here's the thing, for a long time, and we did this ourselves, where we were building our own software. So there's just so many options out there, and often the better solution does not come from some VC funded platform. Like, some of the best marketing tools were made by other bootstrap marketers who really understand the direct marketing type stuff we do on the internet, because we have an audience creator relationship. That's what direct marketing means. It doesn't mean infomercials and junk mail. But so, for example, we use Mighty Networks as a community software originally at Unemployable, and they were so clueless about just basic features of upselling and just I could go on and on about it. They just didn't have a clue. While some platform like Kajabi, which I was never really a fan of, at least they understand that stuff because they come from that world. So my skepticism of anything coming out of Silicon Valley is not just that they don't have our best interest at heart, and they don't, but also they rarely understand us as a market. So this article that I was talking about earlier that I shared with my agent was about how Silicon Valley needs us, if you want to call us creators or audience or content entrepreneurs, right? They need us more than we need them. And that's kind of badass. And that's what gets me excited about where we're at and where we're going, because we've been recognized as a force that the VCs are throwing money at, but we don't need those platforms necessarily unless they serve our interest in a very specific way. And that to me means there is not going to be a big winner. There's going to be a continued proliferation of niche solutions that people like us use and put together as we see fit.
Sean, thank you for the question. No, I want to agree with you, but I think you and I and everyone on this call, we need to continue to get out there and say, look, you don't have to just do whatever that platform wants you to do. You don't have to just be there. You can build out your community wherever you want to build it out. And the more control over you have that communication process, the better. And so that's where, again, we could get into passion economy and creator economy, but that's a whole nother Twitter space, right. Apparently. Yeah,
like passion economy was coined by Andreessen, right?
I believe so. Passion economy. Well, passion A16Z now, they're all over creator economy. They seem to have moving.
No, yeah. A16 started with passion because I remember that article. Yeah. And I was like, okay, whatever. Why are you talking about this? At first, I didn't even make the connection. I'm like, we don't need you. We don't need VC, but they are doing it to attract platform builders. I get it. Okay.
Yes, they are. But again, for everyone on this, listening, you don't need to have passion for your particular thing. You don't need to necessarily love the thing that you're creating content about to be successful. If you serve an audience, love your audience. serve the audience. And if you serve the audience, you can create whatever you want. You don't have to be passionate about that. So I get a little bit concerned where, you have to love it and you have to love what you do in life. And you see people giving advice to kids, just go do what you love. No, don't do what you love. Go do what you're good at.
Well, it's the opposite problem too, where someone, and this used to be early, this is a, offline, direct marketing area, business opportunity that kind of bled into the internet, but they would actually sell it. You don't have to know anything. You don't have to be an expert. Just what are you passionate about? And that's just as equally as bad advice, right? Like, that doesn't mean you have an economically viable topic. You need to think about, you not only build an audience first, you think about the audience first. What do they need, right? That's how you succeed. But that's not how you market to most human beings, who are obviously self-interested and want it to be easy. And, none of that is true. So that's why guys like Joe and I try to tell the truth as much as possible.
Exactly. We were trying. I want to get to, before we close this out, because we've got 7 minutes left, I want to ask you about audio. I remember years ago you started a podcast network, and then you sort of weaned some of those shows off. Can you talk a little bit about your feelings about audio, podcasting? Where is it going?
It's interesting because at Copyblogger, we launched our first podcast in 2010, right at the beginning of it, heading towards mainstream. And it was called Internet Marketing for Smart People, and we had so much fun doing it. But Copyblogger was so popular in text that I made the mistake of comparing the numbers for the podcast episodes and saying this isn't working. While now I realize that audio, in addition to being more of the future as we go forward, along with virtual spaces, et cetera. I mean, things like Spaces and Clubhouse, the underlying audio technology is the same technology that's going to fuel conversations we have when we can see an avatar of the other person, or even, there's even new Zoom-like technology that makes, the person appear to be sitting right there, that kind of thing. All of these are baby steps into virtual worlds, the metaverse, if you will. Joe, you and I geeked out about that a couple of weeks ago. And that's where all this is headed. It always has been. Make no mistake. It's just things are starting to accelerate. But I understand now, like with Unemployable, doesn't have, for the podcast, never had Copyblogger kind of numbers, but that's where all the engaged people are. They'll actually listen to you. So when you talk about minimum viable audience, you may have an email list of 10,000 and 2,000 of those people are engaged, and a subset of those people are the ones who listen to everything you say, right? Who are the most important people in that audience? It's those people. And I think audio and video also are ways. So it's really, it's a complementary format to the broader audience that is a complement. It's not supposed to be equal to perhaps a reader who just wants to get the answer to a particular problem from an article, because that's the most efficient way to transmit that information. So there are different uses for these different modalities, and you have to look at it that way.
Well, wouldn't you say that your strategy, once you built off the blog and then you started to diversify, you realized that the more we diversify, our best customers are the ones that have more content experiences with us?
That's exactly what you just said, much better than I did. But that's what I was. That was the point I was trying to make, and it took me a while to figure that out. So with the podcast network, I launched the Rainmaker platform with a 8-part, audio lesson thing that, it wasn't a normal podcast. It was more narrative and educational. But we launched an entire SaaS platform that we later sold with an audio series. And I was a guy who kind of made my name as a writer. So we were definitely into trying different things. And I can't even remember what possessed me to use audio for that, but it was at that time where we were very much interested in podcasting, and we launched the podcast network, and it was a success, but in a different way than normal podcast people think about podcast networks. And that was what took me a while to figure out. But it's exactly what you boiled down to, that one sentence, which is the different content formats are actually, they can be an alternative, but they can also be a vehicle where you continue to refine who those most engaged audience members are.
It's funny. Took us a couple of years to find the data when we were at Content Marketing Institute. But we found out our best customers, our best paying customers, our best yielding customers were the ones that were subscribed to at least 3 things we offered.
Yep.
Whether it was the magazine, whether it was our webinar series, whether it was the blog, whatever. It didn't matter what the mix was. It was the number. And I always used that 3, and I shouted it from the mountaintops. And I'm like, oh, that's why you diversify off the main platform. Last question. We got 2 minutes left. What would be, let's say somebody here is either struggling a little bit or they want to be a successful content entrepreneur like you have. What's the one piece of advice that you would give them today that maybe will change their stars, as they say in A Knight's Tale?
Man, it's really about, first and foremost, you have to understand who you're talking to and why they should listen to you. And also operate from a point of your core values. Some of the most successful brands in the world are essentially cults. Apple, Harley Davidson, and you'll sometimes see in places, especially with personal brands or influencers, how people will accuse these audiences of acting in cult-like fashion. But that's because you've invoked a sense of belonging and common unified commonalities. I think Robert Rose used that term a long time ago, and I stole it from him. But people want to feel like they belong with other like-minded people. And you often hear that people don't trust expertise or authority anymore. Yes, they do, if they also think you're a person like them. So the whole idea of creating generic, bland content so that it won't offend anyone is the same recipe to creating content that will attract and engage with no one. You have to, and people always think about political issues or hot button topics. Not necessarily. Apple is built on a almost worship of design and creativity, of against a nonconformity, rejection of the status quo. All of that was done in the face of taking a little upstart company that was getting pummeled by the PC and then eventually becoming a $1 trillion company that now has the opposite problem. Now they have to find messages that resonate with everyone because that's now their market. And that sucks. I mean, I think Steve Jobs would hate to see it's counterintuitive, but Apple became everything Steve Jobs wanted it to be. But at the same time, it had to leave behind what got it there. If we could all have those problems, that would be wonderful.
Exactly.
But I doubt we'll ever get it. Yeah. I don't think we're going to worry about it.
No, but I love the statement. If you create content for everybody, you create content for nobody. And I think that's what you're talking about. You have to make an impact. So, Brian, thank you so much. Brian, before I close this out, where is the best place people can get more information about you?
Well, I think this crowd, Unemployable, will probably be a good place. If you're a Gen Xer like Joe and I, then you might also be interested in Further. So that's unemployable.com and further.net. Unemployable is mainly aimed at freelancers and solopreneurs, but with a obvious content bent, an audience first bent, if you will. So that is where you should go. And there's always copyblogger.com. It's chock full of thousands of articles of good stuff.
Okay, back to Joe now. So many takeaways from this. Brian is wicked smart about what to deliver to an audience and when to do it. But what Brian did in the beginning is just a very simple recipe for content entrepreneur success. Find a niche no one else is exploiting, deliver valuable, consistent content in one channel, build an email list from that, and then monetize. Oh, and then sell part of it for a ton of money. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Brian Clark. Join us next Thursday on the Content Inc. podcast for another very special interview and case study from the Content Inc. book. Good luck, and go out and change the world for the better.